really interesting applications where you're collecting data about your body's behavior, and then there's potentially augmented reality applications to visualize that data. I've seen applications for runners, for instance, where you can monitor your performance and through glasses get information about your pace and performance and how you might improve your running times, as an example.
Right. So that what I like about that example is that last bit where you said where it can tell you about your pace and X, Y, Z, but the last bit of how to improve your performance, how to improve your running time. So, Leigh, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about maybe an example like that. So with Boston AR, when we talk about augmented reality, it's not just heads-up displays. It's really saying anytime you take data from the Internet of Things and you experience that information, that is augmenting your reality. So if I wanted directions, maybe the best thing is a heads-up display that tells me to go left or right. Maybe it's my shoes vibrate to tell me to go left or right. Maybe it's headphones that give off a little ping. So any of your sensory channels could be used to augment your reality. So to the point of wearables and watches and whatnot, maybe that haptic modality is not the best way to convey information from my digital, healthcare system. So Leigh, I don't know if you want to chat a little bit about, when is heads-up display the right thing versus how do you augment your reality with the Internet of Things?
And also, one of my research is transferring users' learning curve from 2D to 3D because we used to interact with 2D with mobile phone, with desktop application. But right now, talking about augmented reality, Internet of Things, we're actually interacting with data from more of a 3D perspective. And if for people here have used HoloLens, you understand how little the interaction area is. And that becomes a new thing, using gestures instead of clicking on the mouse, the interaction, how do you improve the interaction between user and the data, and flattening the learning curve becomes extremely important. One of the things that in virtual reality, right now, it used to be in a web design perspective, it's a hover action, but right now it's more of a gaze when you look at the data, and that also kind of transferring both in augmented reality and virtual reality. It's kind of the interaction.
And so that's actually a really nice segue. Where John is working at Meta, one of the big things they talk about is not only building the hardware that you can get to demo, but building the OS of augmented reality, which is, involves a lot of kind of core neuroscience of how do you actually learn, how do you best interact with this data, with these models, etc. I think that's what you're referring to a little bit. So I'm curious, John, from your perspective at Meta, how is Meta figuring out how people learn in a 2D versus a 3D environment? Is it using sensors? Is it really just measuring time to do something in AR versus on a flat screen? If you could comment on that, or whatever other thing you wanted to talk about.
So we're real serious about understanding how the brain works, and so we want to use that to inform us on our operating system. And people say AR is going to be 5 times bigger than VR. VR is going to be a subset of it. It's going to be one continuum, and it's a $180 billion market in the next 5 years. They may be off by a little bit, but this isn't 3D TV that's going to, people got it wrong. This is real, and so we want to create the best operating system. I think the 2 points, and they'll be real quick, I want to make is that I think the old maturing industries where you have the physical world, fleets of things or people, lots of people, global, regulatory stuff, compliance, I think AR can help with learning, reduce errors, and productivity. And as you have more aging experts kind of retire or die or not be around, and you have a lot of unexperienced people coming in, you can create new incentives for the workforce. And I think this region can kind of help come up with the strategies of that. We have the brain power around that, and I'm real excited about that. And I think that, in the past, we've created technology that's incrementally built on where we've come from. And I think now we have a way to think a little bit, where do we want to go, and how do we build the hardware and the software. I think eventually the software is going to be commoditized. It'll be a strip of glass, maybe a brain-computer interface, but what do we want to do with it? And I think there's some smart people here, and it's getting diverse perspectives to work on that. Did I kind of answer your question? And I slipped in my 2 points.
Yeah, you did, thank you. One more question I'll ask, and again, feel free to raise your hand if you've got questions or follow-ups or whatnot. Specifically, I know Meta does a lot of work of really quantifying learning in 2D versus 3D. Are you using sensors outside of just how people are performing, or how is IoT helping you quantify that kind of learning process?
I think we're a startup. We raised, now I think we're at $100 million. We're trying to get the product out the door. We haven't had a chance to do everything. So I don't think we're spending that much time thinking about IoT. I'm thinking a lot about it sitting here and realizing the connections. But I could use some help, and I'd love to create some physics with some bright people here, with some stable companies that have a track record here. And so the answer is, let's collaborate on that.
Cool.
Trying to be powerfully vulnerable.
And just for anyone who doesn't know, when it comes to John, he is the master of collaboration. So if any of you knew the AR in Action conference that happened at the Media Lab earlier this year in January, that was John's brainchild. John also runs TEDx Beacon Street. So when it comes to collaboration or kind of putting things together, he is the glue of Boston
So
technology.
just on that, who was at AR in Action? Okay, I'm sorry if you missed it. We're having our next one on January 6th and 7th, and there are 50 billionaire families that are going to June 6th and 7th, and there are 50 billionaire families that are going to come to it, and it's going to be at NYU in New York City. I'm really proud. The first one was in Boston. Second one's going to be in New York City, and it's going to be epic. If anyone wants to present, and if you're like adjacent to the space or you have expertise, we'd love to have you. We'd also love you to be in the audience. But the real big event is going to be a year later, next January, the day after Martin Luther King's birthday at MIT. We're really committed to making that awesome, and PTC kind of took a risk to make sure it was awesome.
Cool. Dave, you had a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, John, you mentioned your work previously with 3D printing. Can you visualize a day? One of the things that I think is so cool about Euphoria is that using that digital twin, the repair person can know before they ever even leave the place what they're going to need in terms of parts. Can you imagine a day when that part is going to be made in the truck on the way to the site? Or is that a little too extreme?
No, I mean, you look at the history of AR. There's Ivan Sutherland who wanted to visualize a teapot, and he created the first set in 1968. It was someone who said, no, there was a connection there. I just lost it. It was, people get frustrated when your Xerox machine, and now they have other names, would break. And so having a device that can help you kind of figure out where the manual feed got stuck. And I think if you, go exponential or go fractal on that idea and think of a world where everyone has that capability, and I don't know if this is appropriate, but I think a Navy SEAL said we own the night. But what if everyone owns the night? And everyone has access to IoT data, and everyone has access to visualizing it in new ways? Then suddenly you have a synergy that is off the charts. And I think there's a lot of hype here, but it's going to take the killer apps to kind of build the belief. What is the Excel, the VisiCalc of this space? And that's why I think let's build it here. Let's help ThingWorks be at the forefront. Let's help the other startups here. Ross's operation, Beam, help tell the story. And Patty's group, help give the X factor from MIT, to really make that happen. And we can change the vector of what goes on.
So I want to, that was a great case. We're talking a lot about AR plus IoT. The focus is on enterprise or industry or really, driving value to businesses. But I think Ross can maybe present kind of a different perspective on augmented reality and maybe whether or not it plays with the Internet of Things, because you're more focused, at least for now, on sort of how consumers might play with AR. Is that maybe an accurate representation?
Yeah.
So if you maybe want to chat a little bit from your perspective, what all this means to you as someone developing consumer AR.
So yeah, well, there's obvious applications in enterprise. You can kind of break down the AR space into 3 different categories. One is instruction, the second is visualization, and the third I've used entertainment. So if you think about what is exactly the value proposition of augmented reality, it's really, put in technical terms, decreasing the cognitive overhead by offering a much more, at least in the case of visualization, visually intuitive interface that people can have. So then you can see what people imagined at the beginning. So then if you think about what was special about Pokemon Go at the beginning, when really the technology behind it was really, really simple, just kind of a camera, and then you overlay a Pokemon on top of it. There's really no 3D understanding of the world, but it fulfilled a fantasy for 100 million people, and they made more money in 1 month than all of virtual reality hardware and software combined. So if you look at what the capabilities are from a consumer standpoint, It's a little bit less of the kind of, okay, get a couple clients really that have a lot of money that can really build up a business in there. But if you can offer these kind of visually interesting and engaging experiences that are kind of the next step beyond Pokemon Go, can really begin to go after what I view as like the imagination that we all kind of felt when we watched our first animation movie early on. Like really anything was possible. So really I view the future of consumer augmented reality is going to at least start in the entertainment space and then go from there and really kind of bring to life the imagination that people have at the beginning.
So I think
Two more comments?
Oh yeah, you work it.
Oh no, I was just commenting for you in advance.
No. I'm riffing off of what you just said. This is improv jazz. So I think John Hanke, who invented Pokemon Go, I mean, he was into maps, and then when he got bought and was inside Google, he said, "Oh, GPS," and he spent a bunch of time figuring out how to gamify GPS, and he created a company within a company inside Google, which got spun out, and that became Niantic, named after a ship underground in San Francisco that you could find with your phone, and then you use nostalgia. But if he hadn't taken GPS, Pokemon Go wouldn't have gone anywhere. And I think there's an analogy there to IoT. If you don't take IoT, you don't get the opportunity, the use case opportunity that's so powerful with AR. And while I totally agree that consumer is actually where more money is going to be made in AR, I think you first got to go into enterprise. Because that thing back there, it doesn't look like a toaster, but it's not far off. You're wearing it on your head, and it doesn't get hot. The GPU's off, but it's going to be enterprise cases where people are going to be willing to use that. Or maybe when you're alone in your bedroom, in your living room, and you can play a video game off the table. But I think it's going to be enterprise. It's going to create the solitaire for Windows 3. That's going to really get it going, and so I think we should be focusing one of the few enterprise cases that can build the belief. Because consumers and prosumers are going to come, but I don't think they're going to come first.
To at least build on that, I always view the enterprise will develop a lot of the hardware capability because they'll spend $3,000 on a Microsoft HoloLens.
Or
$950 or whatever. Because to make one Boeing engineer make one less mistake per week, they'll throw money at those problems, and I view that there's tremendous amount of opportunity there. But then if you want to look at, okay, you want to make a broad impact across a broad set of the population, they're really not going to develop or buy new hardware in the short term. So then if you, like I view that there are two really fantastic markets there. Enterprise side will really develop the hardware that I view will be the future in which consumers interface. So a lot of the stuff that went into the iPhone originally was developed in different areas of enterprise and kind of advanced along there because they're more willing to be trained up on experiences, more willing to kind of work on the next level. But then if you want to kind of go for the other type of consumer-based business model and reaching a broad set of the population, you really are limited to the hardware that people already have. So that's at least why we go after more a software-based approach to really understand the physical world.
I would agree with your observation. Just I would also build on something that Neil pointed out earlier, which is augmented reality does not always mean visors and goggles and glasses. It can be any number of devices, some of which are within reach of consumers, and it could be mainstream much faster than $1,000 Meta headset.
The other thing is, I think it's not just visual, where you can take 10 to the 8 bits per second of information in. It's also audio, and there's $1 billion industry, being built around audio, and then you have other senses, and maybe we can create senses you didn't even know you had, because the brain is clever that way.
Let me jump in. So, Lei, with your work in terms of fluid interfaces, are you only looking at how people would work with visual data? Or are you looking at optimizing, cognitive load to Ross's example for, enhanced efficiency? Or are you looking at creating consumer delight?
We have like 2 current projects going on. Both are educational games, actually. So it's kind of on consumer education. And one of the things that I kind of really agree with all the other panelists is people's interaction with different hardwares gets a little bit tricky. When we tested with the HTC Vive, people had a hard time with the controller. They have no idea what's going on with the controller. They grab the controller in different ways you would never imagine. So from that standpoint, I feel like if the entry point for augmented reality is definitely not the hardware from the consumer perspective, it's definitely not those like super expensive hardware. It's still the smartphone. It's still the most common hardware all the consumers could get.
Yeah, I like this guy.
and just to kind of put in perspective how important interfaces are, especially with a new medium like augmented reality. You think about every time Microsoft updated Office and you had to like figure out how do I print or how do I do whatever, that's because the interface changed slightly with something you already know how to use 95% of the way. You think of the frustration you feel with just those small changes and how much that can limit your ability to be productive. That is going to be exponentially more true with a new medium with new modalities of interaction with data and new ways of experiencing.
So what I would add is, I agree. We have smartphones, we have iPads. Although you're looking at the tablet markets going up like this, that's going to be an entry to AR. But I taught the first class on making apps for Google Glass. I had 20 of them. It was at MIT. We all thought we were king of the hill. You know how that ended. And I think Google Glass was a heads-up display without hand tracking. 2010 technology, 2013, big mistake. Should have just gone after surgery. They would have done really well. And now, with a HoloLens or a Meta, the Google Glass looks cool and slick. But I think hand tracking is huge, and I think hands-free is huge. And I think the future of the mouse is no mouse, and the future of screens is no monitors. And we're not going to get there. This is a transition, and I do think iPhones, smartphones, and tablets are the in between. But eventually, it's going to be a strip of glass, and it's going to be software folks from CSAIL like you that are going to create some amazing software to kind of prove it, and user interface hotshots like you that are going to help come up with it. But we shouldn't say that the holy grail is like this, because I think in the continuum 100 years from now, this is going to be pretty lame.
Can I just give a shout out for a local startup doing some really interesting work in the realm of brain-computer interfaces? So imagine that they're able to discern intent from brain patterns and control AR, VR experiences. So it's a company that just recently relocated to Boston from Ann Arbor. They have raised about $2 million and are doing great things. I wrote about them in MedTech Boston and would encourage you to find Neural and see if that fits into something that's interesting what you're doing. It's really interesting technology and gets past some of the constraints of traditional interfaces.
Yeah, this idea, that's a great point. Neurable, Ramses is the CEO, and he's been doing some great stuff there. Instead of using your hands to interact with data or, haptic modalities or whatever, what if you could just, with your brain, actually be the interface? That's kind of the next level of things, right? Instead of a keyboard and a mouse, we're open to touch data, and then in the future, just kind of think and interact with it. So it's pretty futuristic stuff, but there's actually a company doing it right now. So, okay, we've got a few more minutes left, so I want to open up to questions. Yeah?
Hi, I'm Robert Hayes from Cast Interactive, and I have a question about what our network has to change in order to handle IoT and augmented reality. Do we need like 5G or 6G networks? Do we need expanded wireless routers that can do new things that we just don't even hear about yet? Where are we at with how these things are going to connect? And what additional security do they need to be able to handle these types of things?
I know who's on the panel. I feel like there's some people better in the audience on that one. So I don't know if anyone in the audience. I feel I'm sure we can bullshit our way through it.
I love how it comes to me. So at least like there's what you need to handle on the server side and what you do on the kind of client side, whether it's a kind of Meta handset or your smartphone. And I view like a lot of the infrastructure is in place to do it. So like if you think about, or is in the works to do it. So if you think about Facebook Live and this whole streaming, so imagine everyone has an augmented reality headset in here, and a certain subset of the data that it's collecting is being streamed back to the server for some of the processing to balance the load on there. So just think about everybody walking around streaming video and the network implications of that. So judging by the way that you answered the question, you might, or looks like the headache that you're getting now.
I'm just wondering, is it like a 5G network? Is it a 6G network? Are we close enough where we can do this stuff today? Or
I don't know the distinction between 5G and 6G.
So I'm going to jump in real quickly. I think it depends on the application, right? So Ross is talking about sort of streaming video and things like that. You're going to, depending on what level of fidelity, that's going to maybe require better networks. But sort of, one thing that Mike pointed out with what PTC is doing is trying to take these CAD models and reduce them, down to like their smallest granular component or compress it as much as possible, right? I think it's to that point of, if you have a limited bandwidth scenario, how do you optimize, what you can do with that? And then to your second point or question about security, I would say that, as Chris brought up earlier, there's a security of things meetup. That might be the best place to get people who can give you more thorough answers, I'll describe, instead of John Sparless.
But I do think, when you think of, Larry Ellison and Oracle talking about, where computing is going, it's been sort of a pendulum and it's going back and forth. And I think 5G networks are going to change things. People don't totally know how. But at this point, we need a killer app to kind of show utility. And I think a lot of other things are going to fall into place. But it's not until AR can make something 100 times more efficient that people are going to realize that the big business case. And I think we should create that in Boston.
Yeah. And one component, I think, of sort of what you're talking about, kind of on the other side of the coin, is with these Internet of Things sensors, with distributed sensors, how do you optimize their battery life? So not so much of how much do they communicate, but can you do a lot of processing at the node, at the edge of your network, so you're only sending the important data? And then you sometimes have to go back and audit and say, look, what data did I miss that I thought was important ahead of time, right? And maybe there's other stuff there that I'm not paying attention to, that I'm not analyzing, right? But there's trade-offs all the time in terms of how much data can you transmit, how quickly can you transmit it, and then how quickly can you turn that data into information, and then transmit that back to your end user who's actually going to do something with it. Jonathan, you had a question?
Yeah, kind of related, actually. So I work as a product strategist, actually, at Beam right now. And one of the things that, in the earlier conversation, there's going to be a long preamble here. I apologize for that, but I'm kind of forming it as I go. But in the first conversation, what made me a little uncomfortable, especially as we talked about consumers, was this idea that their data would become the oxygen for these businesses to continue without any evident kind of trade-off for those users. And I know, having worked on many projects for companies that want to get into capturing data into IoT, making that sale to the end user is really difficult to do. But listening to you guys talk about AR and what it's going to involve, it's going to require a ton of data just to personalize it, because without a personalized experience, I'm sure you've all seen like the nightmare scenario of just a whole bunch of meaningless information in front of your face. Do you see a partnership between all of these IoT devices feeding information to the AR provider so that they actually end up being the value proposition for the IoT devices? And I mean, John, you're VP of strategic partnerships, right, at Meta. Is that something that you see possibly happening, where it becomes like the tip of the spear of the IoT world, where it is the...
Yeah, so if I follow you correctly, I think being able to see things in 3D is going to open up a lot of opportunities. So we have a lot of doctors that are good at interpreting data on a 4K, very expensive 2D screen. And I think you said something about privacy. I'm not going to go there. But in terms of issues of handling more data, I think you could depict a globe with weather patterns or population in 3D and interpret that information much more efficiently than you could in an Excel. Or you could have an infinite Excel set and you could highlight certain parts of it and see 3D things change right before you. And I think when people see that as like oxygen to do their job, I think suddenly AR and IoT become legit. Right now it's fantasy, science fiction. It's a nice feature you talk about to try to seem like you're ahead of the curve. But I think we got to figure out ways that it brings utility.
I think one thing that a couple of years ago, not this past one, but the previous Google I/O event, and maybe someone here can help out with some of the details, but they kind of presented this idea of sort of a communication platform between IoT devices and then externally. And I think it was Weave was the communication device between them, and there's something that resided on the individual sensors. Does anyone have any more details on that? They quickly shut out. So the internet is your best. I didn't mean to cut off if more people wanted to comment on that, but to your specific question, that is something Google sort of approached. I think they recognize that you do want to have at least a common platform for talking with devices and devices talking with each other. But I don't know that that's really been solved in an ecosystem sort of way yet.
So you guys, two things. One, I promised the guy with the nicest kitchen that I would show him Meta, Jim. But if anyone wants to try Meta before you leave tonight, be happy to demo it. The other thing is this LiveWorks is a legit event, and I think as we think about this local ecosystem, we should be, bringing people to it and see how it can be a platform for a lot of other things. And then I want to do a shout out for being the 50